Good afternoon. Today, I want to talk about my own sense of personal agency or my own purpose in life as an individual and how much control of it, particularly in connection with my writings, my books, and my internet expression. And I'll just mention that, first of all, there was an original printing of my first book, Do As To Tell, Gay Conservative Lashes Back. Um, and that actually in 1997, that actually sold pretty well. In about 3 years, I sold out the 400 copies or so while I was living in Minneapolis. I didn't have to really try that hard to do it. But then it went print on demand. And then I've had, as I've shown you before, I've had two other books. Um, When Liberty is Stressed and this the speech is a fundamental right. Being listened to is a privilege, and that's actually from Ex Libris. Um, the others are from my universe. Um, but let me bring up the whiteboard with the outline of what I want to talk about. And think I can enlarge the print here. And let me just start by saying that first of all, the book came out, and as I said, that my own printing came out in 1997, just before I moved to Minneapolis. And um, I had a couple of public speaking engagements at Hamline University and the University of Minnesota, and some bookstore events and so on. And I had quite a bit of word of mouth, and so I did sell just the books. But then by about 1998 into 1999, I became a lot more dependent just on the internet to be read and be found online and so forth. So my freedom of reach, and what I called freedom of reach, because had never been possible before about 1996, that you could post something in anywhere in the world except where it was blocked, maybe communist China, then somebody could find it, and you could gradually, particularly if you had a very simple website, which I did at the time. I had a very simple domain, which I called High Productivity Publishing at the time. I also mirrored it on AOL Hometown, which became available. The FTP became available in 1996. And it turned out, because I had a very simple setup, my even without asking for keywords, my files were getting found much more readily than those of companies which had databases and all kinds of things in front of the content. Over time, that changed, and in time, I didn't have that advantage anymore as social media came and algorithms, and the searching inside databases got a lot better. But for several years, I was really being found a lot and had lots of attention. So this gave me until after 9/11, I would say. This gave me the ability to influence public opinion and even policy outcomes with my own speech without any gatekeeping. And that's an absolutely revolutionary thing, which can be good for critical thinking. It can be good for some things, but it could also be problematic if you stop and think about it. It could undermine activism. It could undermine democracy if too many people did this and not enough people were willing to um, run for office or knock on doors or help raise money for candidates and that kind of thing, which I've never been willing to do. So it's really a double-edged sword. And the online reach that I had, was sort of augmented also by the kind of unusual nature of the issue I had started out with, which was gays in the military, the don't ask, don't tell policy, which would not be repealed until 2011. But at the time, in the late 90s, it was still somewhat controversial. And it was because it talked about the intimacy of people in confined spaces. Also, when they didn't choose to be there, we had had a history of conscription in the past of men, we didn't have forced conscription anymore, but we still had selective service registration. The idea that sometimes people can be forced into confined spaces is it's kind of morally disturbing to talk about, but not too many writers have talked about it. But I seem to get attention for having done that. And so for a while, had quite a bit of reach and influence and was becoming a little bit known, and particularly in the Twin Cities, I think, in Minneapolis. Um, the Now the speech was kind of gratuitous, and I put my content up free. I didn't require a logon or anything, and it was paid for because I had, it was cheap then, and I had done well in the stock market, and I had earned money at work and was putting it into this. So in a sense, and then later on, after time went by and I came back with mother and after the layoff and then after she passed away in 2010, I had the advantage of some inherited wealth. So this might seem to give an advantage to my speech. Well, there's some rules about what I can do with the trust, and that's some parts of the trust, and that's a sensitive issue too, but I won't get into that today. Now, my speech is individualistic. The things I say are sort of a little bit objectivistic. I don't talk about classifying people into marginalized groups and then treating them differently or protecting them or something. I talk about only individual freedom and individual responsibility. I sort of feel, you don't actually have a right to be born into wealth or born into stability or born into democracy. You can't choose when you're born or on what you're born as, or even on what planet you're born, probably, or where in the universe you're born or when. So, and I sort of feel like you have to deal with what you've got at some point and overcome it, which is sort of a right-wing idea, I think. But that's always the way I have felt personally about a lot of things. I just have. And so that's kind of the approach I've taken in a lot of the things I've said. And some people, that doesn't sit well with some people, but that's kind of the way it is. Some people feel that even though the things I say about some issues, they could be seen as legitimizing the claims of societal opponents, even though I may dissect the issue and make constructive comments and use critical thinking. Particularly, this has become an issue recently about gender identity, and there is a kind of parallel between gender identity and the issue of confined spaces for biological women, and confined spaces in the past in the military and even in dorms. There's a kind of parallel between those issues. So there is, even though my books did not cover the more recent issues about gender identity, you could extend the discussion to that today if you rewrote it or added onto it. So, yeah, that's a particularly troubling issue that there has been such an extreme focus on that one putatively marginalized group with youth that are supposedly trans youth, that they're considered marginalized, and there's so much controversy over definitions and what words mean and so forth. That's particularly around that issue. It's also true that if the speech is gratuitous, it could attract bad actors, which might be a problem for people around you. If you're saying living with family, like when I was living with my mother, it never did. But there was one incident when I was substitute teaching, and which I'll maybe talk about in some more detail in 2005 later, actually trying to write a screenplay about that incident, because really what happened is really quite mysterious and quite interesting. Also, this question would have ties to the Child Online Protection Act. That's not the same as COPPA, Child Online Privacy Protection Act. This is this COPPA, which protected minors from seeing content online that was harmful to minors, according to the definition, unless there was some sort of age verification logon, and that was struck down in court as unconstitutional in 2007. And I went to the trial in Philadelphia actually for one day um, in late 2006. But given what's going on, and particularly if we have a Republican administration, Trump, whether it's Trump or not, or have even a Republican Congress after 2005, you could see attempts to challenge that opinion and attempts to require it, at the very least, to require all websites to have age verification. But you could do more to make the technology simpler to use, like you could use the blockchain and so on. I think there are things we can do today that we couldn't do in 2007. It might be a solvable problem, even for me. Now, commercialization and or professionalization, which is something I've been criticized. I've recently been run into situations where I've gotten that comment. If people want to work with me, my content seems kind of amateurishly put together. I don't, I seem to be working on my own. Don't have anybody working with me, or that may change soon. I can't really get into the details right now, but it looks like that's likely to change. But the commercialization or professionalization does raise the issue. If you're going to have to sell things, even if you're going to sell copies of your books, like this again, if you're going to sell copies of your books, you have to aggressively contact people, build email lists, deal with the possibility people will think you're spamming them, particularly the spam issue. Deal with just the feeling of hucksterism. You perhaps need sponsors for your YouTube channels. You need to be able to pitch other people's products. And in the job market, after my layoff at ING at the end of 2001, after 9/11, and in the job searching for, I found a lot of jobs going around where there was a lot of hucksterism involved, and that was not, I didn't think that was good. So I generally I resist pleas online, or mostly online, to join the causes that others have, even to resist people that are politically dangerous. Donald Trump is dangerous. There isn't any question that in my mind that he broke the law in many ways and doesn't respect the law. And this is dangerous if he were to win. There isn't much question. So I am campaigning right now against Trump. I guess I am. And because Trump doesn't seem to believe in reality, he claims that he won 2000, he won that the votes were stolen, and that's not real any more than some claims on the left about gender are real. I mean, both the right and the far left can be guilty of denying reality. And so Reality's Last Stand, that website Colin Wright has, it really, to me, it applies to both sides, both the right and the left. Because the right's also guilty of it, just like the left. But I do generally resist pleas to join others' causes and be known publicly for doing so. And I volunteer sometimes, but for relatively short term and privately. Now I am working the elections. I work the election of 2023, and that's a 16-hour day. I get paid, but it's a very demanding, tiring thing to do when you do it. And so that's the one thing where I am doing some working. I may expand on that, and I'm looking into it to do something else, because I need more money coming in, for one thing. And because I have certain beneficiaries, one in particular on my trusts I put on it, and because things have changed, excuse me, my throat's drying out. I could be incidentally supporting things that I don't fully believe. And I've been asked about that. Would I do more personally for these causes? And I have a real problem with one of them, as you can tell, with the radicalism and that's going on with that one issue. The gender with respect to minors is a real problem. And in general, there's been a lot of talk that from the left to demanding allyship of people, and particularly anti-racism, demanding that you actually participate in opposing a political enemy, opposing the right specifically. If you're going to be heard from at all, before you have a right to be heard from at all, that's been an idea that the left has tried to push since particularly since 2020. It was going on a little bit before, maybe in 2019, but since the pandemic, it's become a real problem. Now, if I were silenced or canceled, cancel is the other issue, cancel culture, then I would lose my agency, and others cannot speak, and I can't let others speak for me if I no longer have my own voice. And I would feel like I would vanish into nothing. It's kind of like vacuum decay in the universe or something. Oh, I also just wanted to mention, if I were more commercial, one of the things I'd have to do is do commercials for sponsors. And I've never done that before, and I'd have to be comfortable with doing that. I meant to add that. I would, but if I were silenced, I would, I'd become a void, I think, and I would, but it's conceivably the way the world is going, and the way inner speech and protecting children, and the way the effect of the internet dependence, particularly by young people, has been seen as negative. And I'm sort of depending on that. You could have a situation where you can't have your own presence online unless you have some accountability for the results of like having dependence. So that's the skin in the game issue. And this ties into earlier arguments that I've made about marriage and having your own children. And that's a problem with my issue of upward affiliation that I mentioned earlier, and I've mentioned in earlier videos. I cannot allow a third-party professional to manage my entire online presence just to appease the ideologies of people who might give me something I want, for example, make me more involved with DEI or something. I can't allow somebody to mold my appearance and lose my independence and being able to speak for myself. Again, it's very important that what I say be my own message. And just when I see all these pleas from some publications, particularly that they, addressing me by my first name in emails, that's another thing. I don't address people that I don't know in sort of spammy emails. That's rude. That I'm their friend, they're depending on me to come for them. Well, no, they're not. I'm not part of their group. And so I resent them. Now, maybe I need to get over that. Maybe I feel contaminated by being connected to people that are behaving like they were losers, or they want to make victimization something to be proud of. It's almost like cry bullying. And I just don't want any part of that. But yet I do realize the danger, we do face a danger of moving toward fascism with, Project 2025, some aspects of it, and particularly if Trump were elected. I'll just also add that before the internet, having trouble getting this to behave as so, I've kind of lost that whiteboard, but let me just get it back. But before the internet, what I was trying to say was that as an adult, I kind of led a double life from the first 25 or years or so of my working career. And while I was childless, I kind of made myself influential and effective with this sort of expanded localism with the hobbies. In fact, I had a big classical record and CD collection, which at one time was big before everything was on YouTube. And I played tournament chess. That's still a big thing. And well, not in tournaments anymore because I'm old, but I mean, speed anyway. But that was a big part of my life. The United States Chess Federation at one time. In fact, in New York City, I actually lived across the street in the cast iron building from where they had actually been located at one time. Travel was cheap and a lot easier, particularly when you were living in Dallas. Long before 9/11, it was a lot cheaper and a lot easier. The energy crisis of the 70s really kind of went away. So I kind of had an expansive localism. But in 1973, moving geographically to New York City and became very important to me. And I put a lot of energy into meeting my own needs to find intimacy my own way, which I've talked about in the last video with my own particular quirks and what does matter to me in personal relationships. That was the big video recently. A couple of situations that happened with this upward affiliation contributed to my changing jobs, and it actually contributed to my relocating from New York City to Dallas at the start of 1979, which actually gave me another year or two of warning before I had a serious risk of being exposure to AIDS. And I never did get it, but that's quite one of the ironies of my own history. You can check the YouTube playlist for Do Ask, Do Tell Show and the series of videos called My Second Coming. Sort of a pun there, but you can check that to get the details on the playlist over to the right side of my screen. But that is what I have to say today. Personal agency is a very important topic for me. And I do need to keep my independence. I can't give it away to somebody else or give it away to activists. They can't speak for me, and I can't speak for them, instead of speaking for myself. So that is what I wanted to say today. And I do thank you very much for listening.